Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Helen.
And this is the Squiggly Careers podcast. Every week we talk about a different topic to do with work and your career, and we hope we share some ideas and some tools that just help you navigate all of this squiggliness with that bit more confidence, clarity and control.
And all of our episodes come with lots of extra resources to help you learn. Things like our pod sheets, which are one-page summaries that you can get from our website, amazingif.com. Pod mail, which pulls all of our resources together and you get it first if you sign up. And also Pod Plus, which is a weekly conversation with either Sarah or myself, or sometimes both of us. We've not done Pod Plus together for a while, but when we do, it's fun. But that is all free and it's there to help you. You can find everything either in the show notes or on our website, amazingif.com. So today we are talking about how to get a sponsor. And the reason we're talking about this is that we know that it is both a role and a relationship that you can have with somebody that can really help your career. And we talk about it a lot in the sessions we run for people on how to build career communities. And it's often the one that I see people are sometimes starting from scratch on. They're like, I've not even thought about this sponsorship thing. How do I do that? And so that's what we're going to cover today. We're going to cover what does it mean to have a sponsor or to get sponsorship, which is slightly broader. And then we're going to talk about how you can make it happen. So let's just start with what is a sponsor? So as an individual, so I guess this is sort of capital S sponsor, that is somebody who has got access and influence over an area you're interested in and who is prepared to advocate for you. So with that definition, this is kind of very individual when we're thinking about that. What is sponsorship? I think this doesn't have to be a person who's doing this for the entirety of your career. This is a relationship with someone where they're still advocating for you, but perhaps it's in a smaller way. Perhaps it's something that can happen more frequently. Perhaps it feels a bit less formal. So the two things are valuable, but we do kind of want to draw this distinction between a sponsor and sponsorship.
And I think when you think about sponsors and sponsorships, sometimes it can fall into the category of a should. I should have one of these because I've heard people talk about it. Or, sometimes companies have programs around like mentorship and sponsorship, don't they? So often I feel like this is like one of those, I wish I had one, but I don't quite understand what it is. And I certainly don't know like how to make it happen. So it can feel like one of those elusive like career things of like the haves and the have-nots. And I think it is worth saying that even though both Helen and I have really benefited from both sponsors and sponsorship, I never label anyone in that way. I think it is just more about what these people, what these relationships can bring to you that perhaps is sort of unique to them. So when I think about people who have sponsored me in my career, certainly at different moments, so I do think, as Helen said, these sponsors can kind of come and go, or maybe some of these sponsors that have sort of lasted. It's often where they can see things that you can't see. They can spot opportunities or create connections that you wouldn't be able to do for yourself. So I think that's one of the really valuable things about sponsors is they sort of bring this otherness and this newness that would be very hard to sort of create individually, sort of by yourself. And then they're really generous with that. So they're on your side. They want to support you. They want to see you succeed. And then they sort of have that. I feel like they've got that in the back of their mind. And then they're like, oh, that person would be good for them to meet, or that opportunity would be a really good fit. And then they don't just think, they also do. So I think advocacy it's an act, isn't it? It's an action, because you can easily sit in a meeting and think, oh, that project, Helen, I can imagine Helen being interested in that. But unless you actually say something, unless you do something with that kind of value isn't realised.
I also think it's there's some element of vulnerability, I think, for the sponsor, because what they are doing is they're recommending you, they're endorsing you, and like if you don't deliver on that, it doesn't make them look good. It's their reputation. By recommending you, they're sort of attaching you to their reputation. And I just want to make it really real for people with a couple of examples. So if I think about some specific sponsorship situations I've been in recently, there's an amazing woman called Aviva Wittenberg Cox, who I would definitely recommend people follow on LinkedIn. She does an awful lot on gender and generational diversity in the workplace. Great podcast called 4 Quarter Lives. But she recently sponsored us, and me specifically, to speak at an event in Paris for the OECD. And to the point of access and influence over areas you're interested in. I did not have access and influence over that community. I didn't have any existing relationships. I hadn't spoken in that forum before, but she recommended us and our work to create that opportunity for us. And it was brilliant brilliant. The extra win was I saw her on the train on the way, so I got a little extra chat. And then
had a glass of champagne, if I remember rightly from the photo.
Yeah. It was nice. It was really nice. But the other one would be one that happens regularly, I think, for us is our sort of what we call our kind of squiggly sponsors. And so these are people, you might be one of them listening today, who take us into their organisations and are saying, I think the work that Sarah and Helen do could be useful for our organisation, and they recommend us. And again, that has led to so many different opportunities in companies that we wouldn't have had without that level of sponsorship. So, it's a very real and valuable thing that we can all benefit from.
And this week, I've actually had a very specific example of sponsorship in that I've been applying for an award. And as part of that award, which, by the way, we have a very bad track record of winning awards, but I'm persevering. So I did start to question. I was like, we're doing another award that we're probably not going to win. And I'm asking people for sponsorship as part of it. And so I had to include recommendations in the award entry. And so approach specific people and basically say, can you please write a couple of lines about the impact that we had? Can you sort of advocate for what we do at Amazing If and Squiggly Careers, in your own words and in your own way? And it's an interesting process to go through. And I actually think you could sort of do this without necessarily having to enter the award. But almost if you were imagining now, okay, well, who are the 3 people that I would ask to recommend me? How confident do I feel asking them? And what do I think they might say? And do I think they could be specific about me, what makes me brilliant, what makes me stand out? And actually, some of the people that I went to were obvious people. So people I know really well. We've done a lot of work with their organisations. So I was like, okay, I can second guess what they might say, and I know they'll really want to support us. But a couple of people I went to were maybe less obvious. Maybe people we'd not done quite as much work with, but it was them as individuals. I knew that they were sort of that point around generosity. I knew that they would want to see Amazing If and Squiggly Careers do well. Almost like individually, I have seen that advocacy before, not only just for us, but for other people as well. I think some people do have that sort of in their DNA. They sort of want to help other people to succeed. And so a couple of people I actually didn't know quite as well, but I was right in that they came back and they were like, absolutely, I'm so glad you asked me. I feel privileged to be asked. And like they were just sort of enjoying the process. And then that meant I got a range of sponsorship and actually people saying slightly different things and some things that surprised me or that I hadn't known for myself. So that's why I was like, it's always interesting to think about kind of range of sponsorship as well.
So we have got 4-part process to help you get a sponsor and get valuable sponsorship that can help you with your career. So we'll go through each part in turn, and then don't forget that this is all summarised in the pod sheet. So if you want to kind of work through it all and reflect on who might be in different boxes and what you might do first, then you can fill out the pod sheet to help you get started. So part 1 is about spotting a sponsor. There's a couple of things that are important here. So first of all, if you go back to that definition at the start, that a sponsor is someone who's got access and influence over an area you're interested in, you kind of need to know what areas you are interested in. So for Sarah, for example, it might be the award that she was applying for, or for me, it might be, there's a particular company that I would love us to do some squiggly work with. That you need to decide what is it that you are interested in, curious to learn more about, want to get involved in, and be really clear about that, because then you can be a little bit more directed in your efforts with sponsorship. Once you've got those areas down, you want to write down who are 3 people who've got some access and influence over those areas. So maybe they work in the team that you'd like to learn a bit more about. Maybe they're part of a community that you'd like to have greater connection to. That's what we mean by the access and influence. They've got sort of an opportunity in that space that you haven't got at the moment. And then just because someone has access and influence doesn't actually mean that they are going to demonstrate the behaviours of a sponsor. So once you've kind of identified those people, it is worth doing a bit of a sponsor sense check and see whether you have any evidence of sponsor-like behaviours. So this is things like, when you look at those people, can you see any times in which they've kind of recognised other people in their work? So, like in an email, I might have written, Sarah was amazing in this meeting today. I definitely think she should take the lead in the next one. Now, that would be an example of somebody, recognising someone's impact and effort. So listen in meetings, look in emails, you'll be able to see some of that. recommendations. So literally just like Google the person and see what comes up. What you might see is maybe in articles or LinkedIn posts, they might have recommended somebody else for their skill or their contribution. That's a very sponsor-like thing to do. Or what you might see is some kind of involvement in something sort of outside of their role, something a bit more purposeful. So maybe they're connected to a charity or a community and they're contributing to that. That's sort of indicative that they want to work in a way that helps people sort of beyond them. Any of those things are a good sense check that they're demonstrating some sponsor-like behaviours, so they're more likely to do that for you. But it's worth doing that. Don't just assume because they've got access and influence, they're definitely going to behave like a sponsor.
And I think a good question to ask at this point is, can managers and mentors be sponsors? And I think, unfortunately, the answer to this one is a little bit one of those, like, it depends. And I also think it depends a little bit on kind of what you're looking for. So what I think we don't want to do is make our development dependent on one person. So ideally, I don't think we want our manager to also be our mentor, to also be our sponsor. And then we sort of go, oh, brilliant, I've ticked all of those boxes with this one person. What happens if that person goes and does something different, or they move to a different country or something? You could end up then feeling, almost like feeling the gap that, you know, when maybe they're not there anymore. I often, in my own experiences, have found that mentoring relationships have turned into sponsoring relationships over time. So I think first and foremost, you go to a mentor for advice. So if I think about a couple of people through Amazing If, maybe I approach somebody because I think they're going to give me really good advice on, running a company that's growing in lots of different places and spaces. I feel like they've done that. I just want some kind of advice from them. Then they get to know you. I think it's often those people who you click and you connect with. They're really interested in your work. That's usually a good sign of somebody who wants to go kind of beyond one conversation. And then straight away, I often think the people who become sponsors, they're the ones where you get the emails from and they say, oh, do you know this person? Or I saw this, I read this the other day. Did you see it? That would be helpful for you. And you're like, oh, okay, they're sort of going beyond mentoring in the moment. And actually, I had a great example of this from Kath Bishop, who's been on our podcast before, Olympian, author of The Long Win, which is just updated, actually. It's a really great book if you've not read that. And she spotted Squiggly in the Sunday Times. And so straight away, I was getting WhatsApps, I was getting pictures, have you bought it yet? And then not only was she saying a squiggly spot, she was also then telling me why she thought that was important. So, when squiggly becomes common language, that's when you're having a really big impact. And she's also proactively made connections for me before that I haven't asked for. So I feel like Kath has kind of gone from a bit of a connection to somebody I definitely, we might like swap ideas, to then somebody who definitely does that sponsorship. So obviously people can do more than one thing at once. And I think when you think about your manager, I think some managers are very good sponsors. And I think it is a brilliant behaviour to see. And I think some managers are not. So I think we don't necessarily have to expect this from managers. And if your manager doesn't do this for you, I think don't panic. We can sort of find other people. But I often think, I was thinking about my standout managers and leaders. They have all been very good at this. They are talking about you when you're not in the room. Now you've got to give them the info and the data to be able to do that really well, which we'll talk about. But I think you kind of have that, the relationship goes beyond, like the sort of the day-to-day tasks and to-dos. It does go into, they see themselves as a manager where it is their job to support you to do all the things that you want to kind of do in your career. And they're really proactive about that. And to me, that is sponsorship.
Yeah, I also feel like there's quite a lot of humility in their approach, because it's
not about them.
It's not about them. It's not about them. They are there and they're behaving in a way that is all about helping you. And it's a real kind of ego shift, I think. Like it's all about encouraging you to be at your best. If it just helps, the way I always think about it is mentors, their primary role is to give you advice because they've done something you want to do. With sponsors, really it's all about advocacy. So it's that kind of shift. If you're kind of working out, this person's my mentor, or they're becoming my sponsor, it's that shift from a relationship that's 100% advice based to one that is kind of moving towards a bit more advocacy, a bit more introduction, a bit more connection. So part 1 was spot a sponsor. Part 2 is support a sponsor. Now, this is something that I really learned from an Ask the Expert episode we did a while back with Sylvia Ann Hewlett, who I think has still the person who has done the most work around sponsorships. If you really want to dive deeper into this, then we've done an episode with Sylvia. We'll link it in the pod sheet, but you can also just, look at her book. She's got one about sort of how to get a sponsor, and then she's got one on how to be a sponsor. And when she came on the podcast, one of the things that really stuck with me was, it's okay spotting a sponsor, but that doesn't automatically mean you get sponsored. Actually, it's something that very often you kind of earn. And one of the easiest ways to start that process is to think how you can support a sponsor. So by this point, we've got a name, right? We've got a name of someone who's got access and influence, and we know that they've demonstrated some sponsorship behaviors. So what we now need to move to is think about, well, how could we help that person? And you're going to have to hold the confidence gremlins in their cage at this point, because I think it's a lot of the time where people go, well, what have I got to give to that person? They're super amazing and all this. Hold the confidence gremlins back, because we're going to think about how we can help these people. Start with that individual. What might their problems be? You might know what they are directly, or you might have to hazard a guess given the job that they do or where they work. What might some of their problems be? Or what might some of their priorities be in terms of their work? What do you think is important to them? What sort of goals might they be going after? And once you've got those in mind, you're going to then think about, okay, well, what have I got to give that could help them solve that problem or move that priority further forward for them? And some things to sort of spark ideas here could be, have you got some relevant insight or experience? So I remember this when I was at Eon. I'd moved into the work in Eon, and there was somebody that, a guy called Phil, I've talked about loads on the podcast, but he had access and influence over this team called Ignite, which was an innovation team. And that, it's always my favorite places in corporates were the innovation teams. And it wasn't a team I was in, but he was head of it. So he definitely had access and influence. And I helped him by creating some connections. So I didn't ask him to sponsor me to move into that team. My first thing was, how can I help him? I had some connections outside of the organisation from previous jobs that I did, and I kind of offered them to him. Would it be helpful if I made that introduction? So, I had some experience from a different business. I had those connections. So those are always ways that you can be helpful. Sometimes it might just be your time. Like, you could just say, oh, I'm really passionate about what you're working on. I'd love to help if I can. I've got some time that I could put towards that project if that would be useful. So sometimes just, passion and time can be helpful to people. But you have to, see their problems and their priorities, think what you've got to give, and then actually be proactive. They don't know you've got it unless you kind of reach out and offer to give some help for them.
And I think that point about earning really resonates with me. I do think you earn sponsorship. I don't think it just happens. So I do think it takes time. So this is not a quick win. I don't think sponsorship is a quick win. This is something where you kind of persevere, but also you never quite know how this is going to show up or where it's going to be useful. I think you just need to trust that sponsors and sponsorship can make a really big difference because of that kind of access and advocacy that those people have. But it's also why you want to go kind of beyond one person. But when I think about this, I do start with the what have I got to give question, the kind of people helping people with how we define networking. Because this is something where I always find it a bit uncomfortable, and Helen knows this, almost not starting with a give. I'm way happier being like, how can I be helpful? And I'll just keep doing that. And if that's all that ever happens, then that's fine. I think I do trust in that kind of career karma point. But as Helen was reminding me when I was like, I feel like I've not got anything to give a couple of people that we want to create a connection with, sometimes other people can see your gives more clearly than you can see them for yourself. So if you are listening to this and thinking, I'm not useful, what can I do? Maybe just chat to like a friend or someone you kind of trust about it and be like, what do you think I'm good at? Or what do you think I've got that could be useful for other people? I was actually mentoring somebody yesterday, and we were kind of going through the conversation, and you could see she was a bit like, I'm not sure if I've got anything useful. And I was like, but you've got a really specific skill that so many people would love, like lots of charities would love this, loads of volunteer groups would love this. And she was like, do you think? I was like, yes. You're like, I just know that. So I could sort of share that back with her, and you could see her thinking, okay, I just, we don't always give ourselves credit for our natural talents, because it's just the thing that she was good at. So she's like a great graphic designer, and I was like, loads of people will want your skill. Yes, if you're prepared to give that, lots of people will want your skill. And then it's funny how you could see then that just opened up lots of ideas and avenues for her. And then actually, even during that conversation, I think I actually moved from mentoring her to actually being a sponsor for her, because actually I didn't have loads of advice for her. She's in quite a different world to me. But what I realised by the end of the hour, I was like, I can create some connections for you. And started to mention, I was like, oh, but I do know someone in this area or these areas. And they're sort of second degree connections. It's like someone knows someone, but I was confident I could make them happen. And you could just see her she was like blown away by it. I was like, oh, I can make an introduction to that person. And she was like, you know them? And I was like, oh yeah. And so it was so interesting. I was like, something that started off definitely with kind of that mentoring vibe. By the end, I was just like I'm not the person to give you advice, but do you know what? I can give you access and create connections and almost advocate her to some people I know. And then I can sort of get out of the way. So I felt like I was sort of an in-the-moment sponsor that I suspect will last like a week, because then all of these people I'm going to sort her out chatting to, they then become actually much more helpful mentors as well. And I think that's sponsorship, because I'm sort of going out of my way to do that for her, just because I sort of go, oh, that's something I've got to give. I can give my connections.
And I think that's a good example as well of the difference between a sponsor and sponsorship. So you may or may not continue to do that, but you did it in that moment and you made those connections, that sort of sponsorship in that moment. Whereas kind of the sponsor is probably a more enduring relationship, and it's like slightly more connection. Both are valuable. Please don't think anyone is more valuable than another. Actually, I think having lots of sponsorships is really, really, really healthy. So the third one, so we've now spotted a sponsor, we've supported a sponsor, so we've got a bit of credit in the bank. The third part is we're actually going to get sponsored. Now this person is going to make those introductions, make those recommendations, open some doors for our development we're not going to be able to do for ourselves. In order for that to happen, we need to give sponsors something to say. So they need to kind of know what we want, or they need to have some evidence of our impact, so that they're not just going, Helen Tupper's a nice person, because that's a nice thing to say, but it might not help me, with the introduction they want to make. And so this really is where maybe you're going to share some stats or facts about the work. So for example, I've actually got a mentor meeting in a couple of weeks with somebody. And they are officially my mentor. I've been given this as a mentor, but I also know they have the power to be a sponsor because of their role and their access, and I know they do. But that transition from advice to advocacy will only happen if I give them something, and I need to give them some details and some data, so it's not just a nice chat together. So I'm literally going to create a one-pager of what we're doing, what our current impact is, and what are some of the things that we'd like to do. So they've got that insight about my impact, but also some insight about how they could help beyond the conversation. And I think that's not for everybody, but that's what I'm going to do for that particular situation, like really clearly put it on paper.
I've got images of you turning up and being like, presentation time.
It's one page so they can forward it.
Okay. Of course it is.
But I do think that's a good point. Like you need to make it easy. If you want to get sponsored, you need to make it easy for them to sponsor you. So if I create a 10-page deck, that very important person's got to find time to read it. So I'm not going to do that. It's going to be a simple one-pager with kind of insights and ideas that I'd like to progress in. And I am going to ask for help. So I think that is the other thing, that if you want to get sponsored, not only do you need to give someone the information to make that easier to do, I think you also need to make the ask. Like, do you know anyone who? I'd appreciate it if you could do. Like, those some of the things that we really need to have confidence in that moment to make that ask. And because you've already helped that person, remember, people helping people, you've already helped them by, helping with a problem or priority. So you've got some credit in the bank, and that is likely to create some reciprocity in the relationship, which will make them more likely to help you in return.
And I think for a lot of people, where Helen and I might be slightly different now versus in our days where we actually had managers and worked for a proper company, just like sort of now just doing our own thing and figuring out as we go. This is where I do think your managers, or maybe senior people, though they don't always have to be more senior. Sponsors don't always have to be more senior, but they are people with influence in your organisation. I think a common mistake that we make is that we assume because people work with us, they know how to sponsor us. It's like, oh, but they're in the same meetings as us, they're in the same cross-functional project, they have seen me at my best, so surely they're like, I don't know, when the next interesting project comes along, they will just be like, oh, well, I've seen Sarah, so I know she's brilliant, so I can very specifically say Sarah should do that, and this is why. And I think there we are giving ourselves too much credit in other people's brains. And it is not that those people don't care about you. It's just that everybody has a lot going on. And they probably do think you are brilliant, and they might have seen you at your best, but we just don't want it to be sort of a general sense of, oh yeah, they're really good at what they do. Like, that's okay. But I think we want a sort of more zoomed in, more unique, more ownable version of sponsorship than that. And so if there are those people in your organisation, because I suspect that'll be the reality for a lot of people, your managers, people in other parts of the company, who you're like, firstly, do they see me doing a brilliant job? Yes. Do I sense that sense check they could be a sponsor? I would then be, almost as Helen just described, thinking, how can I just make it really clear to them what I'd like to do more of, what I'd really appreciate their support or their help with? For me, that would often look like a one-to-one conversation, which I would probably position more at the start as a bit more of like mentoring. Like, oh, I've been really enjoying that project, and I'm thinking about like what I might do with these strengths. So I'd kind of ask a question, and I would position it as a one-off, can we just have a mentoring, like a career type chat? Very low key, informal, and so that people don't get also, they're like worried about, the obligation of like becoming a mentor with a kind of a capital M can feel really time consuming. A one-off chat, most people will say yes to. And then I think you can sort of just take it from there. Or it might be, you might not need to have the conversations. It might just be about how you communicate information. Or it might be about summarizing your progress so far and just making sure you're thinking, are these things that then people could use when I'm not there?
I get really confused between whether things are analogies or metaphors. So just go with me, grammar people. But I was thinking about, the idea that sponsors open a door for your development. I think what we're trying to do here is give someone the key to open the door.
Yes, like they want to.
They want to. They're at the door, but I think you've got to give them something, like some insight information about you and what you do and what you want, that can help them to open that door for you. I think is that an analogy or a metaphor? One of those. Yeah.
Yes, it is one of those.
And should you wish to ever get in touch with us on the Squiggly Careers podcast and let us know the answer to that, it's Helen and Sarah at squigglycareers.com.
I once asked, quite recently actually, I asked one of my best friends who's very good at grammar and like loves it. Some people have a real love. I was like, oh, is this a metaphor, an analogy? And she was like, no, it's a simile. And I was like, okay, now I've got a new thing to research. Why did I not? I did English A level, but I did English literature A level because I was like, oh, is that just reading books?
I think I did combined. I can't even remember what I did. I think I did.
For A level?
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah.
That surprises me a bit.
That's hilarious. Why? Because I'm like not got good attention to detail with my writing. Why?
No.
Oh my God, you can't leave that there. Why is that surprising?
Because I just imagined that you were doing like business.
I did do that.
Economics. Something else very vocational and useful.
I did English, business and law.
Yeah. I mean, the English is the one that I'm like, I'm slightly surprised. I am slightly surprised by that. Whereas like I did like English literature, sociology, philosophy, and geography.
No way. I mean, geography. Well, I know you, so I know you do geography, but that's the little random one in there.
Oh, I did human. I like human geography. Of course you did. Yeah, I don't care about the weather, but I do care about the people.
Given communication and writing is a big part of what we do, and
maybe
English isn't such a bad part of it. Just one thing before we kind of go on to part 4 with the kind of getting sponsored. I do think it is also important that you show gratitude. Don't let there be a sponsorship black hole. So sometimes Sarah and I will be sponsored by people and we don't even really know it's happened until it sort of comes back to you. That's the thing with sponsorship. Someone will be like, oh, blah, blah, blah.
We had it this morning, didn't we? With a charity. So
yes.
We had a charity get in touch with us and I was like, great. And then we know that the reason that charity got in touch with us was because another charity sponsored us and sort of recommended us. So then my next question was, do we know who in that original charity was the sort of the recommender? Because actually I'd really like to go back and say thank you to them.
Yeah.
And that's that point, isn't it? Like we could just go, okay, that's nice. Or we could go back to them and be like, oh, we know that. We really appreciate it. That makes a difference. Because obviously if we do that, what are they more likely to do?
Do it again.
So, I always do think that, like, I always want to dive a little bit deeper when I do hear, often people will talk about, oh, someone recommended you. And I sort of go, oh, okay, like who? Like, who was that someone? Because I know that that's that reputation point. I don't think it is a small thing to recommend an individual or an organisation because you're sort of really putting yourself on the line. And it's like when we do it, because we recommend some people for lots of our clients, I'm like only recommending those people. I'm like, they're incredible. I've got like so much trust in them, and I feel like they've worked really hard to earn that. And so if someone else is doing that for us, I'm like, I definitely want to say thank you.
I've actually got a flip side to this, which is where somebody recommended somebody to me, that and it didn't turn out.
Work out.
No, really bad,
tense.
Really bad, really bad. Like, block on LinkedIn bad. And so then I got back in touch with the person who was very senior and said, look, I just want you to know that this has happened, because I thought I know that they wouldn't want to be associated with the behaviour that I had seen. And so I went back to the person.
What did they say?
Oh, they were really grateful. They said, I'm really surprised, I'm really sorry. And I was like, you don't have to apologise to me. It's not that. It was more, I just wanted you to be aware. You might want to connect with the individual, or when I'm not sure what's going on, but I'm just conscious that you'd recommend it. So maybe it goes the other way as well.
I mean, we need to hear more about that story when the podcast is finished.
No,
I need to hear more about that story.
Yeah, that was a me and Sarah not the many thousands of people that listen to this episode.
Part 4?
Part 4. So this is the final one. It might seem like a small one, but I think it's actually quite important. So the part 4 is about being a sponsor of others. So everything at the moment, we've kind of talked about you and your career and you getting sponsored, but I actually think that it's really important to think about how can you sponsor other people, because it's not only quite a nice thing to do and probably creates advocacy back to you when people do that, but also it means you get a bit closer to what do I need to sponsor this person in order to be an advocate, what is most useful. And I think the more you understand that, the better you are when you make those asks of other people. So it is nice to do, it's useful to do, you'll be accelerating other people's development, but it would also mean that it's easier for you to go and get the advocacy. So I think this almost becomes like a bit of a sponsorship cycle. I think you spot the sponsor, you support the sponsor, you get sponsored, and then you give sponsorship, and you use that insight from giving to go and spot a new sponsor and do it even better next time.
So just to summarise those 4 parts: part 1, spot those sponsors; part 2, support your sponsors; part 3, get sponsored; and part 4, be a sponsor of other people too. And so I hope by exploring sponsors and sponsorship today, we've really helped to make it practical. It feels like something you can take action on. But if you're still feeling stuck, or if you've got any other questions for us on sponsorship, so I do think this is a big topic, you can email us at any time, or if you've got ideas for things you'd like us to cover in the future, we're Helen and Sarah at amazingif.com. And don't forget, we will include links to useful articles or other podcasts as part of the show notes. I've actually recently read a couple of really good articles on sponsorship from Herminia Ibarra, who is a professor at London Business School and who I interviewed last week, because she is going to be an Ask the Expert episode, probably in about 6 or 7 weeks' time. Really good episode coming up. When just someone really knows their stuff. And then everything I asked, she just straight away went to, this is the answer. And it was practical and useful. And she'd asked that good question at the start, like, what's useful for your listeners? So I just said, keep it practical, something everyone can do something with. And she listened and kind of met that brief. And when you just finish and you're like, yes, great. That's what we should all do these things. And she's right. And she's done the research to sort of prove that she's right. And she is concise and she communicates with a lot of clarity.
Well, we've got a few Ask the Experts recently. So we've got an episode with David Allen. I've got the Cal Newport. You've got Herminia Ibarra. So what I might do on social, so follow us on social, is I might kind of in a couple of weeks' time when they're all out, do a little bit of a cluster, so that if you kind of want to deep dive into some experts that we have spent time with, and maybe you kind of missed some of those episodes, we'll maybe do like a post that just makes it easier for you to find that expert insight. So follow us on social at Amazing If, either on LinkedIn or Instagram, and we'll do that in the future when all those episodes are out.
That's everything for this week. Thank you so much for listening as always. We appreciate all of your sponsorship of the Squiggly Careers podcast, and we'll be back with you again soon. Bye for now.
Bye everyone.